How's it going, people? Since March 2020, here in the UK and elsewhere around the world, we've seen a marked increase in the price of second-hand cars pretty much across the board. Whether you're after a cheap and cheerful high mileage car for the £1,000 mark or an exotic car in the £100,000 region, the second-hand market has increased pretty significantly. Motor Trade have said that from 2020 to 2021, prices have increased by 24.9% on average across the used car market, which is insane. Considering the content on my channel, it's made some of my older videos massively out of date, and it's made it increasingly difficult to make videos at the lower price ranges because you're simply getting less for your money. So with this in mind, I wanted to try to work out if and when this bubble would burst, so I set about doing some research and spoke to some used car traders to help answer this question, and I think I have a general answer for you. That answer is, I don't think the bubble will burst as such, but we will see prices decreasing moving into the future. I hope you find this video interesting and informative, even if I'm way off in my estimations. A lot of this research is backed up by assumptions, so it is just my personal guess based on everything that I've read, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Also, massive shout out to Auction Buyer and Small Cars Direct for their help in giving me an insight into the used car selling industry. Their links will be in the description down below. Remember to hit the like button if you enjoy this video. Let's try and get it to 1,000 likes, and hit subscribe as well if you're into this kind of content. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Before we can talk about how and when prices are going to come back down, let's talk about how they went up in the first place. As I mentioned, it's a 24.9% increase in prices year on year according to Motor Trader, but other groups like the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders name it more around a 33% rise, so already we have some difference in how people are perceiving this growth in used car prices. If you look back over my 2020 videos, you'll find plenty of examples of cars that are way more expensive now than when I made those videos, but the most telling is the Alpha 4C I did a review on, which was around £30,000 to £35,000 back when I made that video in August 2020, and now the lowest I can find them listed for is around the 40k mark, and reaching a maximum of over £50,000. This makes me personally sad, as I really want one, but that's for another video. It's popular to attribute the rise in prices to the shortage in semiconductors or computer chips. This is definitely a key factor, and I'm definitely not going to dispute that, but it's not the only factor, and the reasons why there is a semiconductor shortage are many. There is currently a shortage, and they do have an impact because as new cars become increasingly technologically advanced, they require better computer chips to run all of the different driver aids around the car, or just simply to run the infotainment. So if manufacturers can't get their hands on computer chips, they can't put their cars out, which means people are offered long wait times to buy new cars and just buy top tier used cars instead. At least that's a general line of thinking. Some people have pointed to the increase in cryptocurrency mining as a leading cause, but that's pretty inaccurate, as the two leading chip makers, AMD and Nvidia, note that crypto makes up approximately 1% of the chip industry's revenue and has been decreasing since 2018 when it made up 10%. In reality, it's likely a massive increase in demand that has caused the issue, fueled by some of the difficulty sourcing and delivering materials for the chips, both of which have been caused to some extent by the pandemic. This video isn't about the chip shortage, but to quickly summarize, chips are cheap as chips right now, if you'll pardon the pun, as sales were sluggish prior to the pandemic. The pandemic itself has made shipping chips more difficult and caused delays on things like phones and laptops. The increase in people working from home has caused a massive need for laptops and phones as well, with a 26.1% increase in demand for home PCs, which obviously came at the worst time for semiconductors. The tech trade war between China and the US is limited where some chips can and can't be made, which has actually reduced production in some places, and even disasters like the fire at the Renesas Electronics factory, which supplies 30% of the world's semiconductors for cars, and the drought in Taiwan, which meant factories that account for 50% of the total semiconductor market struggled to get the water required for the manufacturing process. The result of all that is a reduction of 33.4% in new car registrations in Europe when you compare 2019 and 2021 on a month-by-month basis, with estimates between a 26% and a 35% decline in total depending on where you get your stats. All my sources will be linked below for your information. Comparatively, second-hand car sales are up 108.6% year-on-year in the UK between 2020 and 2021, and up 6.6% on pre-pandemic levels. To show that these two phenomena phenomena are related, new cars make up only 12.7% of all cars sold in the UK over the last 3 years, which is the lowest ever. This tells you there is a massive demand for used cars right now. In a world of supply and demand, it's therefore not surprising that prices are increasing. Add on to this some of the information that I've gained from the industry by speaking to people in the trade, and the issue becomes even crazier. So let me tell you a story I heard from one of my contacts. In February to March 2020, when everyone was a bit worried about the pandemic and not sure what was going on, used car sales plummeted. The BCA marketplace, which is the largest used car business in the UK and also owns We Buy Any Car, is one of the main places that used car dealers get their stock. Theoretically, they would normally have around 18 to 23,000 cars in stock, which is around 1 to 4 weeks worth of stock for auctions to used car dealers. Many of these cars come from We Buy Any Car, who obviously get the cars cheap and then list them for a slight profit to used car dealers, who then sort the cars out and sell it to us, the consumers, for a profit themselves. However, they slowed or stopped buying cars during the uncertain period at the start of the pandemic, and that 18 to 23,000 car figure I mentioned dropped to around 5,000 cars being available nationwide from BCA. This meant used car dealers had to work out their options, sell off all their inventory as quickly as possible to get cash out of their businesses to survive, or if they have loads of cash already, buy a bunch of used cars just in case the market dries up. The second choice was particularly popular, as at the time used cars were still pretty cheap from BCA. However, as new ways of buying cars online became the norm, with people who had saved a bit of cash by not commuting literally buying cars sight unseen, it helped to push that boom in used car purchasing that I mentioned before. Companies like Kazoo and Cinch have really benefited from this new way of purchasing. With this sudden demand for used cars but a lack of cars coming through channels to dealers like from BCA, the fight for stock became tougher, and used car dealerships were paying more for each car, which of course reflects in the prices of used cars for us, the consumers. That said, from what I understand, margins for many used car dealers have been hit, as they can only pass on so much of that cost to us, the consumers, because there is a point where people no longer want to spend certain prices for certain cars. One member of the trade in particular mentioned that prices on auction sites for used car dealers weren't very different to prices on Auto Trader, with some cars actually being better value to just get off Auto Trader for stock. Apparently, even We Buy Any Car are paying more now for cars than they were selling for a couple of years ago. I thought this was really interesting, as I hadn't heard any of this line of thinking before, but it came right from within the heart of the motor trade. I would also note this will likely have been a result, at least in part, of the lack of semiconductors. With this in mind, I actually helped to sell the M4 that I reviewed recently and pushed for BMW to buy it back. They offered £24,000 earlier in 2021, but we ended up selling it back to them for £30,000, more than we were offered even by some used car dealers. Now, with all this in mind, I haven't spoken very much about when the bubble is actually going to burst, and that's because I think this context shows that though there may be a bubble, it's a pretty strong one, with every stakeholder in the sector seemingly having higher prices or difficulty providing stock. You'd have to untangle multiple different issues all at the same time for prices to plummet. So you'd need new cars to be more readily available, which means solving the global chip shortage, and you'd need more people selling off their used cars back to dealers or We Buy Any Car, so there's loads of used car stock available, which would mean a sudden surge in demand for new cars and a sudden decrease in demand for used ones. The problem is, the longer the new car market can't keep up with demand, the more likely it is that there will be a decrease in the amount of prime used cars available, as if demand remains high for them, there simply won't be enough to used cars in great condition for people to buy, because all the good cars will have been bought. So I would assume prices for the best cars would increase. Basically, the sooner we can get more new cars into the market, the sooner we can start to fill that used car demand as well. So no, I don't think we'll get a bubble burst, but I do think that when the chip shortage is no longer a factor, and when there is a bunch more used car stock available, not only in the UK but in other countries experiencing similar price hikes, prices should be on their way back down. The key problem with this is, as I alluded to, used car stock is dependent on there being a bunch of new cars to fill it. The question therefore becomes, when will the chip shortage end, and when will that impact used car sales? Well, a bunch of analysts at investment banks would love to know the answer to this too, and as I was once an analyst at an investment bank, although please note not in the investment banking division, I'll weigh in on this. The final quarter of the year is traditionally the slowest for chip makers, suggesting demand decreases at this time of year. At the same time, many car manufacturers and other tech manufacturers for that matter have been getting in trouble for potentially hoarding chips to be able to fill future demand. With both of these points in in mind, it's not impossible that supply of chips can make some ways back to the demand, if demand by manufacturers has decreased by their own hoarding. However, things aren't very traditional at the moment, so I'm not sure how likely it is that this demand will increase anywhere near enough to match supply, and right now, the chip making industry is absolutely maxed out, if not overly maxed out anyway. In addition to this, the work that chip makers are doing to increase their ability to produce and ultimately increase capacity might only be enough to handle a few years worth of demand, as we're expecting chips to be used more and more, as we're becoming more interested in stuff like smart homes, electric vehicles, and more advanced personal devices. When I talk about them increasing capacity, I'm referencing stuff like the new chip making plant being built by TSMC in Phoenix, for example. In addition to this, the work being put into increased chip making capacity will take time to come into effect, as it takes around 2 years to build a chip making factory. The aggressive estimates I could find suggest we might see an increase in capacity by mid-2022, the more conservative ones say mid-2023. I'll go smack bang in the middle of that simply because I don't know all of the key drivers behind the aggressive and conservative thinking, but let's suggest supply starts to increase by late 2022. Then we have to hope that everyone wants to buy new cars, which might be a reasonable assumption if used car values are properly high by then, making it comparatively less expensive to buy a new car. If many people do jump to new cars, they will no doubt want to sell their old cars, so we may start to see a sudden influx of used cars into the market around the late 2022 to early 2023 period. Based on all the information I've read, which again I'll put in the description, that's my best guess as to when we'll start to see maybe some decreases in used car prices. But some analysts have literally suggested that even with a decrease in prices, we can't expect used car supply and demand to return to normal until 2025 or even later, so prices may go down but not all the way back down to pre-pandemic levels for quite a long time. Now I might be entirely wrong about this, so feel free to debate in the comments down below, obviously just keep it respectful. I do hope I'm wrong, to be honest, as I'd like to buy an Alpha 4C for 35k and not 50k, but it is what it is. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please do hit the like button as it really helps the channel out, and subscribe as well if you're new. Massive thanks to the patrons as always for their support, and to you guys as well for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Listen.